Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today, we explain Leviticus chapter 21 in a clear and simple way, step by step. Have you ever wondered what it really took to be a spiritual leader in the ancient world? What the actual day-to-day boundaries were. Today, we are opening up the original Hebrew text to explore exactly that. We are going to map out the fascinating anatomy of holiness.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the context, then look at the rules for ordinary priests, move on to the high priest, discuss the rules for approaching the altar, and finally wrap up with some practical life lessons.
Section 1. Context. God speaks to Moses.
All right, let's jump right into verse 1. We begin with God speaking directly to Moses. Now, Moses is acting as the messenger here, and his target audience for this specific message are the priests, the Kohanim. This entire chapter is essentially a direct, highly specific instruction manual strictly for them. The very first verse establishes our baseline rule. It says, "A priest must not make himself ceremonially unclean for any of his people who die." To really grasp this, we need to look at the Hebrew. The concept of ritual impurity is called Tumah, and the specific word used here for the dead is nephesh, which refers to a departed soul or a dead body. Now, for the average Israelite, dealing with a deceased loved one and contracting this Tumah, that's a normal, completely expected part of life. We all face it. But for the Kohanim, the rules are entirely different. They are held to a completely different standard regarding death and mourning.
So what exactly is this defilement? To understand the plain meaning, the peshat of the text, we have to recognize that in the ancient world, coming into physical contact with death caused a temporary state of ritual impurity. That's the tumah we just mentioned. And contracting tumah immediately disqualified a priest from performing his duties. Now, here is a really crucial point. Contracting tumah was absolutely not a sin. It wasn't a moral failing. However, it temporarily blocked a person from entering the sanctuary, the Mishkan. Why? Because the Mishkan represented the ultimate space of absolute life and the divine presence. Therefore, death, which represents the ultimate impurity, the literal absence of life, had to be kept entirely strictly separate. Because the priest's primary overriding job was to serve directly in God's presence. Avoiding this ritual defilement was their absolute top priority. It was the core of their job description.
Section 2. Rules for ordinary priests.
Now, what's really interesting about this next section, which covers verses 1 through 9, is the specific exceptions given to the ordinary priests. The Torah beautifully balances their sacred duty to God with their basic human nature and their very real need to grieve. Verses 2 through 4 explain that a regular priest actually is allowed to mourn and contract tumah for his immediate blood relatives, but he is strictly forbidden from doing so for relatives by marriage. Specifically, he's permitted to defile himself for his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, his brother, and his unmarried sister who still lives in his household. The text shows incredible, built-in compassion right here. It recognizes that suppressing the grief for a parent or a child is emotionally crushing. It's just too much to bear. So it creates a specific carve-out allowing the priest to grieve those who are closest to his heart.
Moving right along to verses 5 and 6, the text gives us 3 strict prohibitions regarding how the priests are actually allowed to physically mourn. These rules are specifically guarding against the pagan mourning rituals of the surrounding nations. Let's look at them one by one. First, shaving heads. They cannot make a bald spot on their head in a display of grief. Second, shaving the edges of their beards. They absolutely must leave their facial hair intact. And third, cutting their bodies, meaning making physical lacerations or gashes in their skin for the dead. Because these priests present the offerings made by fire to God, they must remain physically set apart. They have to process their profound grief without resorting to practices that mimic the idolatrous cultures all around them. Their physical appearance must, consistently, at all times, reflect their holy status.
Next up, verses 7 through 9 lay out the strict marriage requirements for ordinary priests. A priest cannot marry a woman defiled by prostitution, nor can he marry a divorced woman, which in the Hebrew is called a gerusha. It's interesting to note that an ordinary priest is totally allowed to marry an almana, a widow, but definitely not a gerusha. So you might be wondering, why are these rules so strict? Well, it's because the priest's household had to be absolutely beyond reproach in the eyes of the entire community. The burden of holiness weighed heavily not just on the individual priest, but on his entire family unit. In fact, verse 9 outlines a severe penalty if a priest's daughter profanes her father by becoming a prostitute. The family was the fundamental foundation of the priest's standing in the community, so it had to remain spiritually and socially unblemished. Section 3. The High Priest's Extreme Standard.
Let's step into verses 10 through 15 and see how this all builds, because we are now talking about the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. And let me tell you, if you thought the rules for the ordinary priest were strict, the Kohen Gadol's boundaries are absolute. He is held to an even more intense, unparalleled level of sanctification. This brilliantly illustrates the entire hierarchy of holiness in the ancient world. While a regular priest can, as we saw, bury his parents, the high priest cannot let his hair go unkempt. He cannot tear his clothes in grief, and he cannot go near any dead body, literally none. He cannot even contract Tumah for his own mother or father. His complete dedication to his role as the Kohen Gadol leaves absolutely zero room for ritual impurity. It demands a massive personal sacrifice of his own familial mourning.
Verse 12 tells us exactly why this extreme standard exists. It says, "Neither shall he go out of the sanctuary nor profane the sanctuary of his God." In Hebrew, the sanctuary is the mikdash. And why can't he just leave to attend a funeral? Because the anointing oil of God, the shemen mishkat, is quite literally upon him. This anointing oil was a physical crowning that tied the high priest's very identity directly to the mikdash itself. His sacred duty completely and utterly supersedes his own personal grief. Because he is the ultimate singular representative of the entire nation of Israel before God, he must remain in a constant, unbroken state of readiness and absolute purity. Verses 13 through 15 contrast their marriage rules. While we learned that an ordinary priest can marry an almana, a widow, the Kohen Gadol must marry a virgin, a batulah, from his own people. The plain text, the Peshat reasoning for this, is very straightforward. He must not defile his offspring. The high priest's lineage required zero doubt and no pre-existing legal or familial complications from any previous marriages. You have to remember, the office of the Kohen Gadol was lifelong and it was hereditary. So to maintain the peace, the stability, and the absolute purity of the priesthood's future, his household had to be formed with a batulah. It was all about reflecting the supreme, unmatched level of sanctification required for his unique role. Section 4, Approaching the Altar. Stepping into verses 16 through 24, we find the specific physical requirements for those who actually approach the altar. Now pay attention here, because we are shifting from the rules of ritual purity over to the rules of physical service. The overarching Hebrew concept introduced here is a mum, which translates to a blemish or a physical defect. Verses 18 through 21 list out the specific conditions. Any descendant of Aaron with one of these blemishes simply cannot approach to offer the food of God. The text specifically lists conditions like being blind or lame, and includes those who are disfigured or deformed, having a crippled foot or hand, being hunchbacked or dwarf, having an eye defect, running sores, or damaged testicles. If a priest had a mum, a blemish, he was restricted from performing the physical labor at the altar. Now, I know this can sound a bit harsh to our modern ears, right? But we really have to understand the context of the ancient world. The crucial point here is that this ancient concept required the priests offering the sacrifices to physically reflect the unblemished nature of the sacrifices themselves. An animal offered to God had to be without a blem, and so the priest offering it had to mirror that physical perfection. In the context of the ancient tabernacle, physical wholeness was simply an outward symbol of complete, whole devotion to God. It was a specific ritual mirror effect required for the altar service. It was absolutely not a judgment on the person's inherent human worth or their spiritual value. And we know for a fact it wasn't about their human worth, because verse 22 reveals this incredible built-in compassion. It says, "He may eat the most holy food of his God, as well as the holy food." In Hebrew, these holy foods are called kodashim. This is absolutely radical for the ancient world. Think about it. While a priest with a mum couldn't perform the physical altar service, he was still fully supported by the community. He was completely allowed to eat the kodashim, the sacred offerings. These individuals were not cast out of the priesthood. They weren't stripped of their identity or left to fend for themselves and starve. Not at all. They remained fully part of the priestly community and partook in its most sacred sustenance, ensuring their livelihood was completely protected. Verses 23 and 24 wrap up this section by explaining that these boundaries exist so the sanctuary is not desecrated. Moses dutifully relays all of this detailed instruction to Aaron and to all the Israelites. It helps to think of these rules as concentric circles or rings of sanctity. First, on the outside, you have the general Israelite camp. Moving inward, you enter the priest's courtyard where the general service happened. And finally, the ultimate, innermost boundary of the altar and the inner curtain. Everyone in the community had to clearly understand these concentric circles of holiness and deeply respect the sacred boundaries that protected the divine space. Section 5, Practical Life Lessons. Okay, we've thoroughly decoded the plain text, step by step. But how do we translate this anatomy of holiness into our own lives today?
Even without a physical temple standing right now, what is the core principle behind these rigorous, highly specific laws of Leviticus 21? Why does this ancient instruction manual actually matter to you and me right now? Well, these rules teach us a profound lesson about the heavy, heavy responsibility of leadership. They highlight the absolute importance of maintaining integrity in our specific callings and treating the sacred things in our lives with the utmost respect. If you are in a position of influence, you are called to a higher standard of conduct. Think of a dedicated teacher, a top-tier surgeon, or a community leader. Even when they are off the clock, they hold themselves to a higher ethical standard because of the immense weight of their role. Your boundaries must reflect your values. Just as the ancient priests had to meticulously guard their actions and their households, we too must guard our integrity based on the unique responsibilities we carry in the world. Let's just pause and briefly recap what we've seen today. We have walked step by step through a very clear escalation of holiness within the chapter. We started with the ordinary priest, who had strict rules but some necessary allowances for his humanity and his grief. Then we moved up to the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, whose rules demanded total, uncompromising dedication over his own personal feelings. Finally, we looked at the strict physical requirements for approaching the altar itself. This clear progression teaches us a vital spiritual principle. Greater proximity to the divine required stricter personal boundaries. As the roles got closer and closer to the ultimate sacred space, the personal sacrifices and the level of required purity increased dramatically. Ultimately, the text reminds us repeatedly, I am the Lord who makes them holy. In Hebrew, God is the Makadesh, the one who sanctifies. This is the ultimate takeaway for us today. True holiness isn't just about rigidly following a list of rules. We don't just follow instructions for the sake of checking boxes off a list. We do the actions, we build the necessary boundaries in our lives, but it is God who actually provides the holiness. It is all done in a living relationship with the divine source who sets us apart. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.